She could really introduce herself, but we have Tamar Charney, the Managing Director of Personalization and Curation for NPR, and we'll be finding more about, again, as we change and push the boundaries of the various media, how NPR is changing and pushing radio.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take a page from Emily, and before I go into my usual spiel that I've been doing overseas a lot about what NPR is, how many of you are familiar with NPR? Do I even need to bother with that? Great, okay, because overseas I'm like, I better go through the whole thing about what we are and what we do. So again, we are a radio network. And in a lot of ways, you could say radio really has not changed since the very dawn of broadcasting. I mean, pretty much radio stations still work the same old way. Stuff goes out, over the air, electromagnetic signals, receive, people get audio. It's magic. But in recent days and recent years, we've been really thinking long and hard about how do we reinvent radio. Things have changed a lot since the dawn of broadcasting. And we've been doing a number of things to try to address those changes. Podcasts are one of them, NPR One is another, and smart speakers is yet another one. Now, a lot of people kind of go, well, radio's endured for decades and decades and decades and decades. Do we as broadcasters need to start chasing every single technological change that comes our way? And there have been a lot of them. I mean, 1977, mainframes, desktop computers in 87, the internet in 97, mobile devices in 2007, voice assistants in 2017. Basically, every 10 years, there's been a major shift in technology. And these are shifts in technology that change how we work, how we communicate, how we get information, and frankly, how we live our lives. And some of the earlier developments in computing technology really did not play to our strengths as a radio company and radio stations. Things on screens, right? Things you read, videos. That's not what we do in radio. But some of the more recent changes, on the other hand, it's been a really different story. 2007, mobile devices ushered in the era of podcasts. 2017, voice assistants. Need I say more? Voice? It's all about talking and hearing things back. This plays right into the wheelhouse of what we as a radio and audio production company really have as our core and as our bedrock. So these last couple changes really got our attention. And a lot of people have kind of knocked smart speakers, going, yeah, right, they spy on us, who's really going to use them? Except people are buying these things. We're seeing unbelievable adoption, almost at the level of phones. And we now know every single person in this room, every single person outside is walking around with one of these. The adoption rate is pretty much at the same pace. 78% increase in the number of households with smart speakers between 2017 and 2018. It's actually 23% of Americans now, I just checked the most updated numbers, own a smart speaker. Many of them own more than one. They have them in multiple locations in their home. And they're not just using them to say, Alexa, burp, or hey, Google, tell me a joke. They're using them to do things that radio has traditionally done for people. Playing music, giving people the weather forecast, finding out what time it is even, sports scores, jokes, that's all morning zoos basically do. And of course, two things that we're all about at NPR, news and actually listening to radio stations. 25% of public radio station streaming is now happening on smart devices. And this isn't just stealing listening from web streams, this is a lot of additive listening. This all really got our attention. And so we started to get really serious about our strategy when it came to smart speakers. And honestly, our strategy for smart speakers was much like our strategy for mobile devices, and not all that dissimilar to our strategy each and every time there was another change in technology. The first thing, make public radio content that people know easily available. The second thing we wanted to do with smart speakers, and we did it with mobile devices, and we did it with websites, how do we experiment with the capability this new technology offers? There are different ways to get content. What can we do with that? And then third, we kind of want to own it. We want to be a market maker. We want to create really cool experiences that push the boundaries of the new technology and help people get information in new and exciting ways. So that's what we did on mobile apps, and it's what we're doing on smart speakers. And the two of those will come together in a moment. So initially when smart speakers came out, we first wanted to get the things that we're known for available on smart speakers.
If you have access to a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR. All the latest news, all the standout podcasts, all the captivating stories. Just ask your smart speaker.
Play NPR.
Live from NPR News in Washington.
You can also stream your local NPR station anywhere in the country, no matter where you live. It's all there, waiting to inform and entertain, so you can activate all our voices with yours.
So Emily mentioned something earlier that I think really applies with smart speakers. Like, you just have this thing sitting there. You have no real cue about what to say to it. In the same way that when you just get like a prompt on a bot, you're like, I don't know what to type. And so we really wanted to own that idea of play to make it really easy for people to get our content, because half the time they don't know what to say. So how can we train people to say, play NPR, play WBEZ, play How I Built This, and get the content that they want back from the smart speaker? So that's how we were trying to make station streams, NPR's newscasts, and NPR's podcasts available and accessible. So how'd that work out? Well, podcasts have been a little lackluster. I mean, let's be honest. When we choose podcasts, we often are kind of looking around. We're scrolling artwork for podcasts. We're looking at the title of the show. We're looking at the episode title to make that decision. And when you don't have those cues, it's a little hard to figure out what to choose. So that's been a little lackluster. It's also sometimes hard for the devices to know what you're asking for. Sometimes they'll play a song that has a similar title to your podcast. I don't know if you've experienced that. I have. So again, that's been not the easiest play on smart speakers. Newscasts have been huge. We do a newscast 24/7 on each hour. Lots of people requesting those. Many of the tech companies had them as their default newscasts. And as I mentioned earlier, radio streams also have been a huge success for us on smart speakers. And a lot of public radio stations and a lot of commercial radio stations have been like, great, we can put our radio station on a smart speaker, and we have a smart speaker strategy. Awesome. And it's like, not so fast. Because in a lot of ways, I think with smart speakers, we're really at the transitional beginning. In the same way that when radio started, you may remember, or you may not, or maybe you've read about this, people put plays on the radio. You took a stage play, you put it on the radio. When the web came out, it started here, people took the front page of a newspaper and stuck it on the homepage of a website. This is what we do every single time there's a technological shift. You take the old thing and you put it on the new technology, but it never remains there. Things always start to evolve. And on smart speakers, something that really has invited interaction, and you've learned from YouTube and from Netflix and from Spotify that things should start when you want them to start. How long are you really going to be satisfied with coming in mid-word, mid-sentence, mid-story, mid-show of a radio stream on a device that you expect interactivity on? So we don't expect that it's going to stay that way. This is one of the reasons this fall we launched something called Morning Edition on Demand, which is a way you can get Morning Edition as broadcast from your local public radio station on request on smart speakers. But still, honestly, that's a transitional step too, because you can't skip a story, you can't fast forward. Sure, you can quickly pause it and stop it, and it starts when you want it to start, but it's still not quite the right experience. And this is where the work that we've been doing on smart speakers has really merged with some of the key work we've been doing on mobile, and that's with NPR One. NPR One started really as an experimental project, kind of in the garage of NPR, to see if there was a different way, and a way we could really reinvent radio for some of the technology that was coming out at the time. And at the time, that was really mobile devices. We're all walking around with these things that almost kind of act like a transistor radio. They've got some interactivity built into them. What could we do with radio to kind of make it feel a little bit more native? So we created a system of microservices and a whole editorial workflow to create a new way of basically getting radio using an algorithm. We feel very strongly about personalization algorithms at NPR and take the editorial responsibility very seriously, and think a lot about how we don't end up filter bubbling people and how we actually use it to make sure people get a wide breadth of information and can really explore their world and learn more about the world they live in, instead of just like, ooh, I like cat videos, I'm only going to get stories about cats. That's not the approach we take to it. But as you watch this little video that kind of explains basically how NPR One works, think about how some of that might apply really nicely in the world of interactive devices like smart speakers.
It's 9:03 a.m., and you can already tell it's going to be one of those mornings. So you turn on the NPR One app
It's NPR One.
and hear a stream of hand-picked stories that adapts to what you like. You keep on listening because you hear another story you love. Then another. And another. Which means your favorite morning show lasts as long as you want it to.
So localized, personalized, continuous flow of content. And the way NPR One works is you push buttons to control it. But you could just as easily say something. And that's where those two things started to converge. We realized we had this whole system of technological systems, algorithms, that control content, and a whole team of curators and editorial folks who were making decisions about content to inform the algorithm. How could we then use it to create a variety of different types of editorial products that could be used in other applications, that could be asked for? The Google News Assistant project that's in beta has often been compared to NPR One. But we really got Amazon's attention when they were starting to think about flash briefings. Is there another alternative to that? How can we get people listening longer? And they started working with some of the news providers to create continuous listening flows of content from news providers like CNN and Bloomberg and some of the others. And we said, sure, that's great. I guess we could give you an RSS of some stories. But we've got this whole system of algorithms and editors that create these continuous listening flows. How could we plug in NPR One into the Alexa systems and actually really use the technology we've developed to create a really first-rate continuous listening experience for your new long-form listening project? So the way it works is people who've had an Alexa for a long time, still works the same way. You still get the flash briefings you have set up. But if you're a new user and you say, Alexa, what's the news? Alexa responds with, where should I get your news from? You can say something like NPR, CNN, Fox News, or Bloomberg. If the person says NPR, Alexa says, welcome to NPR. To add local news to today's stories, please tell me your zip code. I had to define that the other day as postal code, but zip code. And they give a zip code and they get localized to their station, so the system starts bringing in local stories to mix in with the national stories from NPR. And from then on out, anytime they say, Alexa, what's the news? They get a flow of content that's powered from the NPR One systems. It's a slightly different flow of content than you get when you're listening to the app, but it's the exact same workflows and technical systems. So really with NPR One, we built this ability to create all these different types of editorial products that could be requested with a push of the button or something you say. We're working with Samsung, and actually this is in the market on the Bixby devices, where you can ask NPR to play top stories, or play a break from the news and get some water cooler stories, or play arts and culture stories. And the person gets 3 stories of the type they requested back, followed by a continuous listening flow of other content. We've learned from YouTube and Netflix, the content should just keep coming at us once we've chosen something, so we have other things to listen to or to watch. Same concept with NPR One. During the midterm elections, and I apologize, this is going to turn sideways, but you'll get the sense of it, we used the NPR One systems to create election updates as the midterms were coming in. Whoops.
Ask NPR One to catch me up on the elections.
This is your midterm election update recorded at 9:07 p.m. Eastern Time. Polls are closing at this hour in more than a dozen states from the Great Lakes.
So again, it's a system of technical services and editorial workflows that are creating listening experiences on voice platforms, on apps, and on even refrigerators now. So it's really proven itself to be this really flexible way of getting content to folks. But we realized there were some other things we had to contend with as we were looking at reinventing radio. Back in the days when radio was king, everybody had radios sitting next to their bed, on the kitchen counter, and now we have smart speakers and mobile phones sitting next to our bed and on the kitchen counter. And these are all devices with screens. We always joked in radio that you had a face made for radio, nobody could see you. Those days are long gone because pretty much everything has screens. And we realized if we wanted to be serious about reinventing radio, we had to up our game in terms of having a visual presence. And sure, for many years, we've produced videos here, there, occasionally, whenever we wanted. But we weren't regularly producing videos to go along with any of our regularly scheduled radio shows. And as we started to see more and more people were getting smart speakers that had screens, and our newscast lost its default position on 2 of the major tech companies' platforms the minute they launched a device that had a screen, we realized we needed to rethink this a little bit. And we really needed our newscast to actually have a visual presence, and what could that be? And we're thinking, God, we're a radio company, we're not CNN, we don't send camera crews out with every reporter covering every story. We don't have B-roll sitting around all over the place. What the heck are we gonna do? So we did some user research to really find out how people think about these screens and what kind of expectations do they have for these screens. And what we found was they're not really looking to, watch them like they watch Game of Thrones. It's really a second screen experience. And they were looking for some sort of visual presence, maybe some information that supplements, but they weren't looking for an immersive experience. It's really great. We do newscasts 24/7. Maybe we don't have to do something highly produced all the time. So we came up with the NPR cat. NPR listeners tend to like cats. It's kind of a thing. Skew more cat than dog. So it's kind of atmospheric. It's kind of companion-like. It has some visual interest. The tail moves. The steam from the coffee pot goes up. The lighting changes and the leaves change depending on the time of day and the season. Just kind of a fun little thing for visual interest. But we got really serious about our visual presence during drive time, because in morning drive, I'll let you guys finish taking pictures of the cat before I change it. Are we good? Okay. During morning drive, just like on the radio, that's when people are listening to smart speakers. There's a huge amount of smart speaker use in the morning. So during the morning drive hours, we actually produce a visual newscast.
Coming up, the latest on the impeachment inquiry. And the Justice Department is weighing in on an investigation of the president's business practices. Good morning, I'm Corva Coleman from NPR News, and here are today's top stories. The former special representative to Ukraine is to testify behind closed doors this hour on Capitol Hill. Former envoy Kurt Volker was mentioned in a whistleblower's complaint. The complaint was about President Trump's July phone call to the president of Ukraine, in which he urged the Ukrainian leader to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden. NPR's Mara Eliason says the complaint prompted the impeachment inquiry by Congress.
The president has always tried to appear to be cooperative and fearless, like he has nothing to hide, and then in the end he doesn't produce information, and his White House pretty much has stonewalled Congress in other investigations. But on this one, they have been turning over documents. They didn't fight to keep the whistleblower complaint secret. They did something unprecedented when they released the transcript. Usually, president and foreign leaders' conversations are not released to the public, and that might make it harder for them to withhold other pieces of information and documents that Congress is requesting.
NPR's Mara Eliason. The Justice Department is weighing in on an investigation in New York.
Obviously, this isn't going to win an Academy Award for cinematography. Did win a Webby, but it's a mix of images from stock photographs, sorry, too much jet lag. Stock photographs, some pool imagery, some things we shot. There's video, there's some panning of images, and all of that is layered on top of the newscast as broadcast. At the beginning, you saw Corva Coleman actually giving a little, teaser of what's coming up on the newscast. That's produced expressly for these newscasts. So we do these every morning. It's been pretty amazingly successful for us, and was something we could actually produce, without having huge numbers of video crews. So we're continuing to think about what more we should be doing with video and how else we could do it to become something that we can offer more regularly instead of just like a one-off, hey, we did a video about one thing, but how do we make it a part of our workflow? So video was one of the things we had to grapple with in addition to the NPR One strategy. We also had to think about interactivity. These latest shifts in computing technology when it comes to media and even with listening, and with voice assistants in particular, is very interactive. And we've always been a broadcast company, so we just kind of put things out there, and we needed to up our game with interactivity too. Now, news involves a lot of names, place names, people names, and new concepts, things that are novel. And we weren't quite sure how well some of the smart speaker technology would understand some of these concepts, and we wanted to grapple with that a little bit. And we were starting to think about what we could do that might be interactive. And we've learned from producing Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me that our listeners don't just like to ask questions, they're kind of smarty pantses, they like to answer them as well. So we thought, hey, let's do a quiz. And Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me was the perfect vehicle because it would help us start to understand how well these devices could grapple with some of the concepts in the news. I'm going to play a little clip of this. This is embarrassing because as an audio company, the audio on this is pretty dreadful. But it'll give you a sense that we were actually using the cast of the show, not the Alexa voice or the Google voice, to ask the questions and respond to what the player says.
Hey y'all, I'm NPR's Sam Sanders, and I'm here today to play Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me's new quiz for smart speakers.
In February, Boston Dynamics made everybody a little nervous with footage of a robot that could open blank.
A door.
That's right, it opens doors. Uh-oh. In August, a group of planetary researchers released a paper saying that blank should be reclassified as a planet.
Pluto.
That's right, Pluto.
So as you can see, it is the cast that's actually, saying the things and responding, not the Alexa voice like the Jeopardy quiz. And so this really helped us understand, how do you write for something that's a little interactive? And how well does the natural language processing work? So it was a great experiment. It's been a fun extension of one of our really popular shows, and I think audiences have enjoyed it, and it's helped us learn a little bit more about what we can do in this part of the space. So we're continuing to figure out where we want to go with quizzes. We're continuing to work with our visual presence. And obviously, we're really thinking long and hard about what more can we do with the NPR One systems and editorial workflows, because we really do see that in a lot of ways as really the backbone of how we're going to be providing content on many of the platforms of today, but also the platforms of tomorrow. And as I talk about what we've been doing with other media organizations, I often mention that there are a lot of different ways that broadcasters in particular could go. And at NPR, we really chose to do more with things that we were already doing. What more could we do with NPR One, something we had invested a lot in? How could we extend on some of the things we're really well known for, like newscasts or quiz shows like Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me? And how do we build on really what our strength is, which is audio storytelling? And a lot of broadcasters around the world always say, well, what should I do on new platforms as they come out? And my advice is always think long and hard about who you are and what your audience expects from you. It's really easy to go, oh wow, new technology could do something really cool, and you can go off in this totally different direction that has nothing to do with why audiences rely on you or what you're really good at. And trying to meet your audience expectation with what you're good at on the new platforms is almost always the best way to find success. Now, none of us really know where technology is going to take us next. At NPR, we've long used the art of audio storytelling to help people understand the world they live in better through news, to help entertain them with smart entertainment that helps them kind of walk in other people's shoes through a more fun way. And we do this all with voice, with audio storytelling, because we really believe that the best way to connect people with one another is through the human voice. It builds that sense of connection, it builds that sense of community. And I think there was a time during some of the early changes in computing technology where we were sort of like, oh God, audio is going to go the way of the dinosaur. But recently we've really been in this moment of a real audio renaissance. And it's been kind of fun to work in this industry at that time. Which brings me to the final thing I want to talk about, since a lot of you are students or educators, which is, as we've been working to reinvent radio, it's becoming clear that there are a lot of career and job opportunities that didn't exist when I was coming up, and I actually don't think a lot of people think about and know about. We still get a lot of people coming to NPR, they want to be reporters, they want to be producers, or maybe they want to do social media. And there's all these other jobs that have developed kind of in the space in between product and editorial that are really kind of interesting, and there's a lot of need to bridge those two worlds, to have people who understand the technology, but also have a really firm grasp in editorial work. The team I run, which is the curation and personalization team, it is actually a team of people trained in journalism who work incredibly closely with the product team and do jobs in journalism that I don't even think people really know exist. In the Facebook announcement today, they talked about some curation being a part of what the team is going to be doing. That's what my team does too. There's a team at Spotify and a team at Pandora that curate music. And this idea of people who think about editorial experiences through the lens of what things do we choose and how do we arrange them? And how do we help the algorithm understand how to use them in a smart way to create great experiences? And who are the editorial people who are programming algorithms and thinking about editorial responsibility? These are all jobs that are starting to percolate, and we actually could use more people trained in this kind of work and interested in doing this kind of work. So that was the final thought I wanted to leave you with, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we just need more people who are kind of interested in doing that work and have the skills to do it, because it's not easy to find right now. And with that, I'll take questions. Approaches we've taken. One is there are some things that actually should just not be personalized. People may disagree with me, but news is news. That's the news of the day. You can skip it, fine, that's your prerogative, but we offer it to you. There are other things where, I don't think it's a problem that we personalize it. You have unique interests. I might like reading literary fiction. You might like reading true crime. I don't want your true crime stories. So there's some more places where we can really do good filtering like that. I think there's other places where, and I think there's a lot of potential here, and Emily was hitting on this a little bit too, this idea of, if you're really interested and really invested in something, how can we get you every single story about it? If you find the Syrian war something really interesting and you want to know every single twist and turn as those stories develop, we could use personalization to get that to you. If I'm only interested in, I just want to know when something major happens, we can use personalization to get that to you. We're honestly not quite that advanced with it, but that's the kind of thing that I think personalization can do well. The other thing we actually are currently doing is making some checks on your listening behavior. So you could start listening to a lot of political podcasts of a certain political persuasion and keep going down that, right wing, right wing, right wing, or left wing, left wing, left wing. We actually have an algorithm that's watching that. And if you start listening to too many podcasts from one political persuasion, it's going to play a little announcement that says, you're clearly interested in a lot of perspectives on the news. If you'd like to hear a different perspective, click here. Right? I love that. And people actually do it. So that was one way of just how do we just put a little check on it? Another thing we did, and please don't tweet this, it's broken right now. If we make a mistake, we can actually get you the correction if you heard the story where there was a mistake. And I think that's another editorially responsible use of an algorithm. Because instead of just giving it to everybody or just sort of hoping people will find it, I know you heard that story, so let me get you the correction so you weren't misinformed. So we try to think about ways we could use it to further editorial responsibility, keep people out of filter bubbles. And the other thing I would say is, algorithms are set up by people to do things. What is it that you want it to do? And we're really clear that we want the algorithm to give people the news and expand their understanding of the world. It can then support some of their unique interests, but if that gets in the way of those first two things, that for us is a problem. Honestly, those were not made for sales pitches. That really was marketing materials and things for people like me to use in presentations. Some of it's been tweeted in the past. We don't have a huge budget for that. There's a couple other things I wish I had videos of, and I don't. Download the NPR One app. It will localize, so you'll start getting stories from your local station. And the website works the same way. It also will localize for you. So we really try on all of our digital platforms to make sure you get localized to your member station, because we work in partnership with the member stations, and part of what we try to do as a network is make sure you get local, national, and international news on all platforms. We do want to get to the place where it's a true cross-platform experience, much like Spotify is. How do you move from platform to platform to platform, and your listening picks up and continues? I think pretty much that's where everybody's trying to go. We're no exception. I think to your first question, that's where we're going to get in the land of creepy pretty quickly as a society. I mean, the devices are going to start to recognize your voice. and give you back your stuff. How we as media companies choose to engage with that or not engage with, there's a lot of questions there, but my gut is that's where it's going. Some of you all may have better senses of that than I do even. All of us who engage in personalization need to be grappling with, like, how can we be more transparent about that? And how do we let people have visibility, but also the ability to almost talk back to some of that? So I think that's one of the things that I think about a lot. I don't know that we have answers yet at NPR. I know the BBC's been doing a lot of really good thinking about that, and a lot of other companies, because, you know, at what point do we as individuals need to have control over some of that and some of what the algorithms have learned about you? We try really hard not to be creepy, and our use of it is pretty light-handed because, again, back to what we were just talking about filter bubbling, we do want you to get the news, and we're not like personalizing down to the degree of like, oh, you only get stories about cats and you got all the ones about dogs, you know? I think, yeah, again, we have a fairly light hand with it, but I do think transparency is going to become a bigger and bigger issue across the industry. That's the really tricky thing. Samsung has a lot of screen presence, so I think it's worked well on a lot of their devices. This is one of the things we're grappling with, and that's why we really tried to coalesce around that idea of play and start training people, play this, play that. I think it's the other reason we have been really thinking about NPR One in the context of smart speakers, because once we get people into this continuous flow of content, we can start placing things in that flow to teach them about other things they can do. And I think that's one of the promises of it, and that's one of the directions we want to start moving. Like, how can we use that as a tool to tell people, while they're in that platform, how else they can use it? Because, you know, and I think the tech companies will be the first to admit it, and I think it's one of the reasons we see more and more screen devices, is you stare at that, you know, that little puck or that column, and unless you're 6 years old, you're kind of like, I don't know what to say to it. What can I ask it to do? The kids, on the other hand, sit with one of them and they just start talking and start figuring out what they can do. So to some degree, I suspect some of this may be generational, and as the younger generation that grew up from, you know, the time they were this big playing with the smart speaker is going to be a lot more willing to just start asking it things till it does something. I think for some of us adults, we kind of like, I don't know what to say, what do I tell it to do? That said, the tech companies themselves, in some ways, have been our biggest partner in helping people understand what they can do with it, because the companies are trying to get these devices used, so they spend a lot of time sending out promotional information about what you can do with the device, and some of our skills and some of our offerings have been among that promotion. One is just called the NPR App. It was originally called the NPR News App, and then there was NPR One. And I think originally when the two products were developed, there was this thought that one would be a listening app with just this new way of getting radio, NPR One, continuous listening stream. And the other one was a place you could read stories from the web. And in a lot of ways, it almost started to seem that that was an artificial distinction in how people actually use media. And quite frankly, for this room only, it's hard to support two apps and promote them and get everybody to understand which app do you need. And I think a lot of people didn't know which one do I download? I don't know, there's two apps in my Play Store, I don't know which one. So what we realized is NPR One had kind of proven itself out. It was originally an experiment, and it's proven itself out as a really engaging, sticky way for people to get NPR content. How do we then take what had been just the NPR branded app and merge it into one app that really uses the NPR One backbone and the NPR One systems of localization and personalization, and start applying that to all content in one single app? So that's where we're going to start to go over time. It's not going to be launched tomorrow, though. That is the thing they always tell you never to end a story with if you're a reporter. Only time will tell. I honestly don't think we know. You know, that kind of depends on people. You know, will people move away from radio or will they not? I think podcasts is one way forward. I think there's still going to be a need for audio content, and exactly how that's packaged up, I think, is the question. You know, is that going to be radio shows? Is that going to be podcasts? Is that going to be a stream of continuous listening? Is it going to be things you click on? But ultimately, it's still audio storytelling. It's still journalism. It's just different ways of packaging it and distributing it. Interestingly, in Europe, some of the stations now are thinking about whether they stop producing radio and just do podcasts that then go on the radio. In the States, for a long time, it's been radio shows are turned into podcasts. But that may be starting to switch. And even at NPR, we do some things that start out for radio and get turned into a podcast. We do other things that start out as a podcast and then turn into radio. So I think that's the first shift that we're seeing along the lines of your question. It's just, is it radio first anymore? Is it podcast first? Is it just digital first? Or is it all platforms at once, depending on what makes sense?
And anyone who wants to ask more about radio by any other name, she will be available, Tamar will be available around right after this. We'll take a 15-minute break and we'll come back with Dan Pacheco talking with us about immersive worlds.
Thank you.